Welcome back. As we reported at the top of the hour here, Harvard University saying it's standing by its president, Claudine Gay. She is among two other university presidents under fire because of their evasive responses during a contentious congressional hearing about how to deal and how to address anti-Semitism on college campuses.
And NewsNation obtaining a new statement from Harvard's governing board saying, quote, our extensive deliberations affirm our confidence that President Gay is the right leader to help our community heal and to address the very serious societal issues we are facing. Calls for genocide are despicable and contrary to fundamental human values.
Today's NewsNation newsmakers are Colby Hall from Mediaite, Dr. Lauren Wright from Princeton, and Guy Smith, former advisor to President Clinton, here to discuss. We were looking over the articles from the New York Times, the LA Times, and some of these comments about her staying in her post, President Gay. I want to start with you, Guy. In terms of the decision to keep her in spite of so much backlash, it's interesting that the response was from Harvard Corporation, which is a business. This is a business decision, but was it a wise business decision?
I think it's a wise decision. I mean, it was a ham-handed response driven too much by lawyers, and it showed that President Gay and the other college presidents didn't know their audience. I mean, it was a congressional hearing, or not a bunch of lawyers talking. She should have just said, it's despicable and against all of our values. And then let me also tell you how we support free speech. She didn't do that. It created a terrible uproar. And people like Dr. Gay need to start thinking more hard about how to deal with this and look at their audience and talk straight to them.
Yeah, it is interesting. After her testimony, she did issue an apology saying that her words amplified distress and pain. Lauren, let me go to you. You know, you teach a couple different graduate school classes at Princeton, one of, the most prestigious college campuses across the country. Your thoughts on this decision from Harvard, and also, what your students have been thinking and how they've been responding leading up to this moment?
I also teach a big undergraduate lecture course, so I see all types of students all the time. And, setting my personal preferences aside, we just have to acknowledge how this started. Universities have been absolutely dismal and absolutely inconsistent about free speech and political neutrality. I happen to believe universities should be politically neutral, but they have given endorsements of some positions over the years, been really consistent, not taking a stance on others. And so it's no surprise, after the path it's taken to get here, that when in a very serious environment with very clear yes or no questions, not, the academia wordiness that sometimes flies on campuses, these professors and university administrators could not meet the task. And so I don't think that the call and exodus from donors is going anywhere. I don't think calls for President Gay to resign in the future are going anywhere. So this just sort of kicks the can down the road, and I don't expect much change.
I think, Colby, a lot of people would never have predicted that in 2023 there would be calls to dismantle DEI. I mean, that would be the most politically incorrect thing for anyone to say or report on. But we've seen it from journalists, we've seen it from educators, and we've seen it from some of those big money donors that Lauren's speaking about. Do you believe that Harvard, in the absence of causing, a resignation to happen, is going to address DEI and speak to the change in culture on campuses?
Well, that's the question. Clearly, the pendulum has swung, started to swing the other way. It's crazy. It's fascinating that a conversation about language on campus that went from safe spaces to hate speech is nuts. My reporting suggests that the board really wanted to force her resignation. She refused to resign, and then they didn't have the stomach to fire her. What really matters now is President Gay's next speech, what she says next, because clearly what she said in that hearing was troubling for a lot of reasons, mostly a PR problem for Harvard. And I think that's what they really care most about. So the way that she addresses DIY and the hate speech issue in her next public speech is everything. And to Lauren's point, this probably calls for her to step down. won't end here. It will just sort of re-up the controversy.
Yeah, that breaking news just announced early this morning. Of course, we'll see where the response heads from here, both on that very campus and across the country and the world. Okay, let's move on to topic 2, everybody. Democrats wringing their hands over some new polls showing President Trump beating President Biden in the popular vote in a hypothetical matchup. So the latest Real Clear Politics polling average showing the former president beating the incumbent by more than 2 points. President Biden's polling troubles driven in part by eroding support among key Democratic voters, minorities, and young people. Lauren, let me start with you again on this one. I thought it was interesting. There was this other poll from Harris X and The Messenger last week that found only 59% of black voters and 45% of Hispanic voters said they would vote for Biden in a race against Trump again. Those numbers in 2020 were respectively 92% and 69%. How do you read those numbers? What do you credit that to? Is that all economy, or is there more to the picture here?
And certain polls found Trump doing even better among black voters, 22% of black men, for instance, 20% of black women. And so these are numbers the Republican Party has not seen in a long time. And that's despite the many times offensive things that Trump says that many people thought would sink him among many groups. And so what we're seeing is that people prioritize other issues, namely the economy. And if Republicans are sending a message of prosperity and Democrats are not reaching out to these groups and have more of a survival message, that might not resonate with them as much. Of course, the vast majority of black voters still choose Democrats time and time again, but that doesn't mean that Democratic strategists should totally ignore this. And I'll just say really quickly, not to be completely cynical, I do think Democrats need to shift their focus away from young voters. They don't turn out to vote. In 2022, the turnout rate among 18 to 29-year-olds was 23%. In 2020, it was 50%. And so Biden might be worried about offending young voters on a lot of his issues. For instance, he's been very strong on Israel, but those are perhaps not the voters he needs to be most concerned about.
Guy, what do you think? Do you agree with Lauren? I mean, there are a lot of people who would say that long gone are the days of putting people in a box, that black voters, Hispanic voters are not a monolith, and that you can't just presume that historically the black vote will go to the Democratic Party. What does the Democratic Party need to do differently?
I don't put any stock in all these polls. They're all driven so you guys on TV can talk about them. Polls are, these days, polls at this far away from an election are people just venting. And let me tell you, prove that to you. The elections back in November, the Democrats won them all. And what's going to win for Joe Biden is the economy, which continues to improve on every measure. And once the kitchen table starts to figure that out, that'll turn. But abortion, women, and look what happened in Ohio on abortion. That just the Republicans had their hat handed to them. And now last night in Texas, with that abortion ruling, the Republicans continue to hand a bat to the Democrats, and the Democrats are just going to bat them in the head with abortion over and over and over again. And all these polls, and also all that poll that you put up there a few minutes ago is just within the margin of error. And when Trump gets convicted, and the Supreme Court's going to, now we've got the Supreme Court involved, and if they rule for Trump, that also means that Biden is immune from any kind of prosecution. So then they're not going to rule for Trump. They've been ruling against Trump. All his own people are ruling against him. So I'm not worried about it at all.
You're not worried about the poll numbers, and that means it's anybody's game in 2024. Colby, Lauren, Guy, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.